Fallout Equestria the Chrysalis, Chapter 13, Part 2. Dusty stepped over, speaking up a second later. Is that bone?
I think it's part of a rib.
I whimpered a little more. The forceps returned, probing through the wound. Eventually, she fished out 2 twisted fragments of metal and another shard of bone.
Alright, looks like that's everything.
Starlight said, finally setting up those accursed forceps aside. We eventually retrieved a healing potion from my bags. The vial had cracked at some point, but it had leaked only enough to dampen the bottle. I downed its contents, then laid back again while it went to work. Past the painkillers, I could feel the strange sensation of my fleshy disguise shifting and mending in a distinctly unnatural way. My breathing slowed, and just for half a minute later, I felt steady enough to sit up again under my own power. Only a tiny feeling of pain lingered in my side, muted to mere discomfort by the painkillers.
Thank you. Thank you.
I said quietly. Starlight looked away as she packed up the medical supplies again, her ears hanging low. Okay, Dusty said, still eyeing me cautiously. So, you've told us what a changeling is. So what about you? He stepped away from the counter to sit right in front of me, staring me in the eyes. So, extensive knowledge of old world tech, particularly military and industrial tech. An expert at hacking, talented at stealth and deception, and a clever talker. And now, we can add demolitions and heavy weapons. You didn't walk off a farm a few weeks ago. They hadn't shot me, yet, over the whole issue of feeding on them, so the rest was relatively easy.
Okay, I am as what's referred to as an infiltrator, or at least I was.
I shook my head.
Infiltrators go out from the hive to blend in among ponies. Mostly it's to get love so the hive doesn't starve, and sometimes, well, we're already blending in amongst ponies anyway, so every infiltrator gets some education in espionage, just in case.
Dusty stared at me. So, you're a spy. My gaze lowered to the ground. I felt very small.
Basically.
He was silent for several seconds as he considered me. Magic-stealing, shape-shifting bugs hiding among ponies, looking like whoever they want. Celestia knows, I've seen some fucked up things out here, but that just takes the cake. He snorted, then leaned in. How many of you changelings are even out there? My ears drooped.
Well, as far as I can tell, 1.
Dusty practically growled. Brahmin shit, what was that you were saying about a hive then? I sighed, trying to piece together exactly how I wanted to say what I had to say. Unfortunately, Dusty didn't have the patience to wait. Hey, he said, shoving a hoof against my shoulder. I'm just about done with this. No more delaying, no more sidetracks, no more thinking up excuses. Just answer the fucking question.
It's complicated,
I said meekly. No, it's not, he shouted. You open your fucking mouth and you tell us the truth. That is not complicated.
Yes, it is,
I replied a little more forcefully.
I could come up with a dozen different lies that you would buy without problem, but the truth, Dusty, I lived through it, and I even have a hard time believing it.
I don't fucking care. Starlight stirred.
Dusty,
she cautioned, but her voice was resigned and quiet, with no strength behind it. A shudder passed through me.
Fine. You want to know the truth? You know why I was so much about the old world? It's because I lived it.
Dusty's eyes narrowed a little more, but I didn't spare the time to consider what he might be thinking, so I just pressed on.
I hatched just after the war kicked off. I grew up and trained while ponies and zebras were all killing each other. I spent years in Equestria, right up until you all tried to kill the world. I got called back, stuffed into a chrysalis to sleep, except it didn't go right, did it? No, it didn't. I woke up 2 weeks ago, and I wake up to find my queen dead. My sisters are dead. The whole world is wrecked. So, I go out, hoping to find the others, and the first day I'm out, I get held at gunpoint just for approaching some ponies. And the second day, I see most of them get slaughtered by raiders.
Starlight twitched, looking at me.
And it just keeps getting worse.
I was trembling as I rose to my hooves.
I live on love, of all things, and here I am, stuck in some ruined hellscape where ponies murder each other for fun. I barely made it. 2 weeks. I am starving, and I lost, and I've nearly died so many times, and the only thing keeping me going is just this pointless hope that my entire hive isn't fucking dead.
Dusty was blinking as he stared back at me, though his glare was gone. When I finally realized I had pressed up, muzzle to muzzle with him, I tried to step back, but I was trembling too much. My hind leg gave out and I just sat back hard. My vision had gone blurry as tears followed, and when I spoke again, it was barely a whisper.
And I just threw all of that away to save the only friends I had, and...
I was met with silence, and then Sickle stirred, her metal plates clattering noisily in the sudden silence.
Holy shit.
She rumbled, a touch of amusement lingering in her slurred voice.
Must be serious. Whisper used a cuss word.
She gave a quiet snicker, but I didn't find the amusement in it. I just sat there trying not to sob. Say what you want. I managed to hold out for 2 whole weeks before this inevitable emotional breakdown. I think I did rather well, all things considered. The silence dragged on for several seconds before Dusty spoke up again. The heat, it was all gone. If anything, his voice was soft and gentle, though cautious. Is there any way that you can prove that? I sniffled, raising a shaky hoof to wipe at my eyes.
What do you want, Dusty?
He was frowning slightly, his eyes slowly wandering. Just... anything that would show me that I could trust you again.
I don't know.
I murmured, slowly shaking my head and sniffling.
Maybe the place I woke up. There might be something, or my old hive, if it's still there.
He mulled it over for several long seconds before slowly nodding. Okay, alright. If it's not too far, you can take us there and show us. It'll have to wait until we're done here, though, and... sorry, but I'm not letting you carry any weapons until then. I nodded weakly. Shouldn't take too long. Those explosions you set off will draw a lot of attention, and the militia should have a patrol heading this way already. Soon as they get here, we can get this all sorted out for good. A chill passed through me. Dusty must have noticed my expression, as he added, I'll just tell them that you got separated and came up behind them. I don't need to go into details.
I appreciate it,
I said, wiping at my eyes again and swallowing past the lump in my throat.
But there might be a problem with that.
Dusty frowned. What's that?
I know that you might not trust what I have to say, but there's something you should see.
He considered me and finally nodded. Okay, what is it? I pushed myself up, standing on still shaky legs.
It's in the grocery store.
There was a hint of suspicion to the way he looked over at me, but he finally gestured towards the door. Alright, lead the way. We started out and immediately halted as Sickle struggled to right herself.
I got it,
she insisted, though her uncoordinated efforts merely left her slumped against the wall. I could relate to a degree, not that it stirred much sympathy to me, it was just enough for me to ask.
What's wrong with Sickle? She's a raging psychopathic bitch,
Starlight said as she pressed a shoulder against Sickle's, using it and her magic to help the armored mare up.
Well, aside from that, she lost like a gallon of blood and downed half a bottle of painkillers. Incidentally, if she falls asleep, make sure Dusty or I know it, or she might not ever wake up again. I'm fine,
Sickle said, staggering for a couple steps before getting her hooves properly under her. Starlight took a step away, watching the larger mare waver, but despite a stumble, Sickle remained upright.
Fucking cunt,
she added, though she followed that with a quiet chuckle. We made our way over to the grocery store, with Dusty and Starlight scanning for threats. I kept a half-hearted eye out as well, for the good it would do. When we got near the edge of the grocery store, I halted at a blown-out window pointing in. Dusty stepped up next to me, then jerked to a halt. It was at least 3 seconds before he finally found the ability to speak up again. What the fuck? He climbed in through the window and moved up to the twisted corpse of a mare in Mereford militia garb. He halted, staring down at her, motionless. Sickle staggered up to lean against the edge of the window, peering in. As she looked around, I got a good grisly view of the damage to her face. While the healing potions had worked their magic, I could tell that her muzzle had been broken and set at a slight angle, and the side of it had been mangled to the point where her lips were twisted up, showing off her teeth. It looked rather horrific, especially with the bars of her muzzle leaving some of the details to my imagination. She didn't seem to be bothered by it as she looked around the carnage of the store interior. It just looked like what I imagined would be what a war zone would look like. Torn up walls, broken shelves, hundreds of spent casings, and several dead ponies. She gave a quiet chuckle.
Not bad. Not bad,
she said in her low rumble before looking my way and giving a rather mangled grin.
For a little bitch.
I gave a weak snort and turned away. A moment later, I blinked, then turned back to her.
Seriously? After all this, you find out what I really am and suddenly you like me?
It wasn't much, but there was a clear hint of... Well, perhaps calling it affection would be really stretching the definition of the word, as... This was Sickle, but there was certainly some positive emotion there.
What?
Sickle said, leaning back against the edge of the window so she could lift a hoof, gesturing at me.
It ain't like I needed to see all that bug shit to know you're a two-faced manipulative little cunt. Nothing new here. Then what?
I demanded, as silly as it was to make demands of this mare who could probably still squish me flat, even in her drugged state. She just shrugged. Dusty suddenly stirred into action, pulling away the dead mare's assault rifle. "Every pony grab what you can, quick, we need to get the hell out of here!" Starlight, suddenly drawn away from Sickle and my exchange, looked over in surprise.
Wait, what? What? Why?
"Because this is a ranger," he said, quickly throwing the contents of her pouches into his bags. "And when the militia shows up and sees that we killed some rangers, we're as good as dead." Sickle chuckled, looked to me, and gestured out into the street.
Better grab your shit.
I turned and hobbled over to my discarded weapons, grabbing them all up, including the scope rifle and battle saddle. While I did spend all of its ammo, it seems likely that it would be worth quite a bit, and that was possibly among the least important things to consider at the moment, but it took only a moment to grab the harness and my teeth. Dusty had just finished stripping the second ranger when I returned, and anger flashed across his face when he saw me. "Hey, I said no guns!"
We're a little pressed for time,
I pointed out and swallowed around the fading lump that still lingered in my throat. Before he could continue to object, I added,
They have a supply wagon parked behind the ruined motel. Lots of ammo and supplies, and we might need to get it to get Sickle out of here. Hey, I can walk just fine,
Sickle said, stumbling a bit as she pushed off from the wall. Dusty grit his teeth but looked back to his looting, grabbed up his weapons and supplies, and went on. "Fine. Alright, grab what you can and let's go. Quickly!" There wasn't really much finesse to our passage. We snatched up loose equipment and saddlebags, grabbing what immediately leapt to our attention, rather than taking the time to dig deeper. I led them out the back of the store, pausing for only just a moment as Dusty grabbed a few things off of the ranger, lying there. From there, it was a short trot to where the wagon had been parked, slowed only by Sickle's pace. Dusty whistled when he saw the heavy machine gun lying onto the ground. "Oh shit, bet you're happy that they didn't open up on you with this instead of that minigun," he said, glancing to Sickle.
Yeah,
She grumbled.
I'm fucking ecstatic.
I threw my collected guns into the back, as did every pony else. "You should be," Dusty said, hooking a leg under it to haul it over, and Starlight quickly moved to his side, contributing her magic. "Big gun like this, and it would go through that armor like tissue. Miniguns are pretty shit against armor, they just hit you with enough rounds to finally find some weak points. That or they mixed up some AP rounds in there."
No pony fucking cares.
Sickle said, holding a hoof over the edge of the wagon in an attempt to haul herself up, though she only made it halfway.
I'm gonna take a nap. No, you're not.
Starlight called out.
No sleeping. Take another healing potion or something.
Sickle grumbled some more while Starlight and Dusty hauled the machine gun back into the wagon. Once it was in, they both helped up Sickle into the wagon. I offered what meager assistance I could, which mostly consisted of Sickle planting a hoof on top of my head and almost flattening me. I panted softly afterwards, while Dusty turned to me. His eyes looked down to the guns hanging around my neck. "Put them in the wagon." I sighed but relented, placing them in one by one. Still, I couldn't help arguing my case.
You know, if I intended to harm you, we wouldn't be here right now.
"I'm giving you a second chance, don't push it." He slipped under the wagon's harness, getting it good, and settled in, and started to pull. The wagon creaked under the weight of its contents, but rolled forward. Grit and rubble crunched under the wheels as he pulled it through the ruined lot and towards the street. Despite the wonders of the healing potion, my side still felt sore, and I could feel a steadily developing limp.
Dusty, do you mind if I ride in the wagon? I'm feeling pretty weak right now.
He looked at me, then sighed, looking forward again. Might as well. Not even like I'll notice you compared to Sickle anyway.
Thanks,
I said, moving to the rear of the wagon and hauling myself up. I collapsed amidst the pile of guns and ammo, ignoring the bits of metal pressed against my side. My unwounded side, that is, as I curled up. I pulled the cloak over me and just closed my eyes. It helped me to hold back the tears that still threatened to come back at any moment. I felt so utterly pathetic. I'd managed to both give up my secret and completely lose control over my own emotions. Worst yet, my own words echoed in my mind. All I had to go on was hope, but my outburst finally consciously acknowledged the fear I was simply deluding myself. 2 centuries was a long time. I heard Starlight climbing into the wagon behind me, followed by Dusty's objection. Hey, not you! You need to be keeping an eye out!
And I can see better from up here,
Starlight replied.
Besides, I'm just as light as Whisper.
Dusty grumbled, muttering under his breath, but didn't argue any further. We continued on to the quiet grinds of the wheels, the rattling of loosely stored equipment, and the quiet clattering of Sickle's movements. I heard her unlatch her muzzle and drink something, presumably a healing potion, otherwise we just rode on in silence, which proceeded to grow more and more overbearing by the minute. Eventually, Starlight spoke up in a quiet murmur.
It was kinda cool.
Sickle rumbled.
What? Not you,
Starlight said. I cracked an eye open to see Starlight looking at me, her expression downcast and ears low. She immediately looked away, her eyes instead settling onto the minigun. Her voice remained quiet as she continued.
Well, we were stuck in that building with 15 bajillion ponies, and they were shooting at us. Then there's all these explosions, and you come out flying out of that building, blazing away with that minigun. It was kinda badass, I guess.
She was silent again, looking awkward as her eyes lingered onto the weapon. I sighed faintly, closing my eyes, though it was only a moment before my conscience started to prod at me. As awkward and as reluctant as it was, she was reaching out to me. And also, as miserable as I was feeling for myself, I didn't need to be shoving her away so I could just wallow a little bit more. Especially when my own survival was at stake. So, I wiped at my eyes again, forcing back the remaining sniffles, and spoke.
Not really,
I said in a hoarse murmur, and I cleared my throat, swallowed, and tried to speak again.
Mostly lucky and sneaky.
She was quiet for a moment before speaking up again.
That was still pretty badass, I guess.
She reached out, poking at the minigun's barrels.
You kinda tore up the place with this thing.
I gave a weak snort.
Luck and, rate of fire, then.
I grumbled.
Dusty was wrong. I don't have any talents with heavy weapons. I never even touched one before today. I probably fired 400 or 500 rounds and hit, 2 ponies?
She shrugged weakly, still not looking at me.
I think it was more than that. Maybe I hit some with blind fire. Still, I did better with my pistol.
Sickle rumbled.
Oh, yeah. You suck,
she said, applying sarcasm about as suddenly as she did anything else. I looked over to see that she had unlatched her muzzle. While that last potion had mostly healed the flesh, it did nothing. It did nothing for the poorly set bone. That left her snout even more lumpy and misshapen than before her injury.
I mean, you only just killed an entire band of mercs, all on your own. Lame.
She snickered a little while I just looked away, feeling strangely annoyed at her contribution, and after a couple of seconds, her snickering abruptly stopped.
Oh. Shit. That means Whimper's killed more ponies than I have. That just ain't fucking right.
I just turned to scowl at her.
I'm quite certain that's not true,
I said, but she just clumsily waved a hoof in my direction, almost jabbing me with her blades by accident.
I mean, since we've been traveling together, dumbass.
I grumbled and looked away again. It was a minute before Starlight spoke up again.
So, you were really alive during the war?
I sighed and reluctantly nodded.
Yeah, I was. It's hard to believe,
she said before a flash of concern crossed her face.
I mean, it's strange, not that... I don't...
She shut her mouth, looking away again with a sudden scowl. It slowly faded over several seconds before she spoke again.
And you're some kind of super spy.
I mumbled my reply.
Not super. And you... feed on ponies?
I sighed, unable to do anything more than nod. Again, she was silent. I hoped that this developing trend of long, awkward pauses wasn't going to become a common occurrence. It dragged on and on and on, until finally she spoke up again, her voice subdued.
You should have told me. I'm sorry, I just... yeah, I get why you didn't.
She shot back, then immediately looked away again, as if ashamed at raising her voice. She finished quietly.
Still though, you should have told me.
She didn't wait for a reply. She simply stood and hopped off the edge of the wagon to walk next to Dusty. I sighed and felt even more miserable. Up ahead, hidden from sight by the edge of the wagon, I heard her speaking to Dusty.
So, where the hell are we even going anyway?
Away, Dusty answered. We need to put as much distance between us and here as possible before they start searching for us. About the only good news is that the explosions were so close that they'll probably send out a hoof patrol to see what happens, instead of sending one of their birds. Unless they know that there were rangers involved, then, well, we're fucked.
So, what do we do after we get away then?
Well, I don't know, Dusty said, sounding very tired. We can't go back to Mereford. We show up there, they're more likely to shoot us than to listen to us, especially with a bunch of dead rangers. Despite how miserable I felt, I decided to speak up. If they knew all about me, I might as well make use of that, and especially if it helped rebuild some trust with them.
I could.
There was a moment of silence from the front of the wagon before Dusty spoke again. You could what?
Go to Mereford.
Again, I only heard the creaking of wheels, and when he finally replied, it was with a bitter tone. Well, not sure if it would do any good. Part of me just wanted to sulk silently, even though I knew it wouldn't do any good. It was time to be professional.
Depends on how you were hoping to deal with Big Gun,
I said.
Were you wanting to get information that would get him arrested, or whatever it is that they do now? Or were you wanting to get rid of him through whatever means necessary?
Are you talking about murdering him?
Well, I'm asking how you want this to end,
I said. Then in a quieter tone, I added.
Though, after what he did to Silverline and Quicksilver and all the other ponies in that caravan, I can't say I'd mind if it went that way.
He mulled over that for several seconds before replying. No. He needs to be dealt with right, so every pony knows exactly how it went down. I'll figure something out.
So, what do we do until then?
Starlight asked. I don't know. Think of something? Another pause. Whisper. Where was that place you were talking about? I blinked, stirring enough to lift my head to see him, and Starlight looked back at me.
The place that I woke up in? I'm not sure precisely. It's near where that tower exploded.
While Dusty only had a vague idea of what I was talking about, Starlight immediately turned to her pipbook, looking over the map. It only took a few moments.
So it's right about here,
she said, floating the device over to Dusty so he could see it too.
We could probably get there by most tomorrow night.
If we cut through the city, maybe, Dusty said. And Starlight smiled.
I've been through there probably 100 times. It might be a dangerous place, but it's safe enough if you know what you're doing.
Her smile faded.
Plus, the Mereford guys probably wouldn't follow us in.
Dusty grunted. Through it is then. We continued on, the wagon rocking and shaking slightly with every crack in the ancient road. I laid my head down again, watching the occasional wall of the buildings we passed. Sickle rustled around in one of her metal saddlebags, followed by moments later the sound of a bottle opening. Starlight's reply was immediate.
Hey, I told you, no alcohol! Not with the amount of painkillers you took!
I looked up as Sickle spit out the bottle cap.
Yeah, and I told you to eat me,
she replied.
Guess you didn't listen either.
She followed that up with tilting the back of the bottle up and taking a long drink from it. All I heard from Starlight was in reply some quiet murmuring. Sickle downed half the bottle in one go. Then she lowered it, and of all things, held it out to me. I stared at it for a couple of seconds before reaching out and taking it. Yeah, I don't like alcohol, but it seemed appropriate at the time, and not so much for the inebriating effects, although at that moment I could understand how some might find that desirable. Instead, I went back to the whole social interaction thing. Sickle was making a social gesture, and as depressing as it was, she was the only one currently giving even a glimmer of positive emotions towards me. So I accepted her offer, tilted back the bottle, and took a drink. I only got a couple of gulps in before she snatched the bottle away, spilling some cider down my chin.
Hey, fuckhead, I didn't say that you could have the whole damn thing.
I recoiled, but despite the harshness of her reprimand, she was actually smiling.
You want some booze that bad? You should have brought some yourself,
she said, then tilted the bottle back to drain the rest of it. I may have not understood Sickle very much, but she had decided that she liked me. Perhaps my rampage of gunfire and explosions had earned some respect from her, though with how little I understood her, I wouldn't bet on that. At the moment, I had to take what little I could get. And honestly, I could really use the knowledge that at least one of my companions was fine with me. So, I gave her a weak smile before laying my head down again, watching the ever-increasing number of buildings roll by.